The little girl couldn't have been more than 6. Her pink sneakers, scuffed at the toes and blinking with every frantic step, were a blur against the cracked asphalt of the industrial cul-de-sac. Tears streamed down her face, carving clean paths through the grime on her cheeks. She ran with the desperate, lung-bursting abandon of a creature fleeing a fire, her small chest heaving. Her target was a wall of leather and steel. 20 men, members of the Road Vultures motorcycle club, who were taking a break outside a dingy auto repair shop. Their bikes, a menacing collection of chrome and black iron, idled with a low, guttural rumble that seemed to shake the very air. From the silent, climate-controlled interior of his obsidian-black sedan, Julian Vance watched the scene unfold with a detached annoyance. This was a detour, a frustrating snag in his meticulously scheduled day. He was here to scout the final parcel of land for his waterfront revitalization project, a multi-billion-dollar testament to his ambition. This grimy little street, with its failing businesses, was the last holdout. The noise, the interruption, the raw, unkempt display of human desperation, it was all anathema to the sterile order of his world. The girl, whose name was Maya, didn't hesitate. She skidded to a stop before the largest of the men, a giant with a beard like a thicket of thorns and a skull tattooed on his forearm. He was known only as Grizz. The other bikers fell silent, their gruff laughter and coarse jokes dying on their lips. They turned as one, a formidable audience for the tiny, terrified performer. Maya gulped a ragged breath, her voice a high-pitched squeak that pierced the mechanical growl of the engines. "Please," she sobbed, tugging on the man's leather vest. "Please, you have to help. They're beating my mama." Julian's fingers tightened on his steering wheel. He expected the man to brush her off, to laugh, to tell her to get lost. It's what he would have done. Problems like this were messy, complicated. They weren't his. But Grizz did none of those things. He dropped his cigarette, grinding it out with the heel of his boot. He knelt, his massive frame creaking until he was eye level with the child. The intimidating snarl he usually wore softened into something unreadable, a deep concern etched into the harsh lines of his face. "Where, little one?" he asked, his voice a gravelly rumble that was surprisingly gentle. "Show us where." Maya pointed a trembling finger back toward the open bay of Sarah's auto, the very garage Julian was here to assess for demolition. A man's angry shouts echoed from within, followed by the sickening sound of something, or someone, crashing against metal. A silent electric current passed through the Road Vultures. Without another word, Grizz stood up. He didn't have to give an order. The 19 other men moved with a chilling, unified purpose, swinging off their bikes and striding toward the garage. They didn't run. They walked, a slow, inexorable tide of leather and righteous fury. Julian Vance, the man who moved markets and leveled city blocks with the stroke of a pen, sat frozen in his car, a spectator to a kind of power he had never known. The world he so carefully controlled had just been violently interrupted, and for the first time in a decade, he felt a flicker of something other than cold ambition. He felt a profound, unsettling curiosity. He turned off his engine and opened the door. The scene inside the garage was one of controlled chaos. A wiry, desperate-looking man, Rick, was being held against a tool bench, not by brute force, but by the sheer, intimidating presence of 5 bikers who had formed a human cage around him. He sputtered threats and excuses, but his voice was thin and reedy in the cavernous space. The vultures weren't touching him. They were simply there, their silent judgment more potent than any blow. The rest of the club secured the perimeter, their silent watch a promise of further consequences. In the center of it all stood a woman, Sarah. She had a streak of grease on her cheek and held a heavy wrench in her hand, like she wasn't entirely sure if she should use it or put it down. Her body trembled with residual adrenaline, but her eyes, fixed on her daughter, who was now safely behind Grizz's enormous legs, were filled with a fierce, protective fire. She was the owner of this place, Julian realized. Sarah of Sarah's Auto. The wail of a siren cut through the tension. 2 police officers, looking young and overwhelmed, stepped cautiously into the garage. Grizz turned and explained the situation in a calm, matter-of-fact tone, his earlier gentleness replaced by a no-nonsense authority. Rick was taken into custody for violating a restraining order. As the police car pulled away, a heavy silence descended. Sarah finally let the wrench clatter to the concrete floor. She knelt and swept Maya into her arms, burying her face in her daughter's hair. "It's okay, baby," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You were so brave. Mama's okay." Julian had remained near the entrance, an alien in his tailored Italian suit. He should leave. This was done. He had seen what he needed to see. A failing business, a dysfunctional life, another property to be acquired and sanitized. But he didn't move. He watched Sarah soothe her daughter, her strength and vulnerability a paradox that tugged at something deep inside him, a chord that hadn't been struck since before the betrayal, before Marcus Thorne had ripped his life and his trust to shreds. He cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud. "That was a commendable display of civic duty," he said, directing the comment to Grizz. The biker turned, his eyes appraising Julian with open suspicion. "We look out for our own. Sarah keeps our bikes running. She's family." Sarah looked up, her gaze meeting Julian's for the first time. There was no gratitude in her eyes, only weariness and a deep, ingrained distrust of men in expensive suits. Men like him were the ones who sent official-looking letters, who raised rents, who saw her life's work as a line item on a spreadsheet. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone clipped and professional, a shield against the turmoil of the last hour. Julian began, his usual glib confidence failing him. "My legal team is quite proficient. If you need assistance ensuring that restraining order is enforced, or with any other entanglements, I would be happy to offer their services. Pro bono, of course." It was a transactional offer, the only language he was fluent in. Solve the problem with money and power. Sarah's eyes narrowed slightly. "I don't need charity." "It's not charity," Julian countered, more sharply than he intended. "It's a resource." Before she could refuse again, Maya spoke from the safety of her mother's embrace. "Mommy, he wants to help." Sarah looked from her daughter's earnest face to Julian's impassive one. She saw the perfect crease in his trousers, the watch on his wrist that cost more than her entire garage, the profound and unbridgeable distance between their worlds. But she also saw something in his eyes, not pity, but a flicker of something else, something lost. "Fine," she said, sighing. "I'll take your lawyer's card." It felt like a concession, but to Julian, it felt like an invitation into a world he had long since forgotten how to navigate. A few days later, Julian found himself driving back to the cul-de-sac. He told himself it was due diligence, a follow-up on his legal offer. The lie was thin, even to him. The truth was, the image of Sarah and Maya, of the fierce mother and her brave child, had imprinted itself on his mind. It was a stark contrast to the echoing silence of his penthouse apartment, a glass box in the sky, where the only signs of life were the blinking lights of the city below. He found Sarah under the hydraulic lift of a vintage pickup truck, her face smudged with oil, her brow furrowed in concentration. The rhythmic clank of her tools was the only sound. Maya sat at a small, wobbly table in the corner, meticulously coloring a picture of a winged horse. "The lawyers contacted you?" Julian asked, his voice echoing in the large space. Sarah slid out from under the truck on a creeper, wiping her hands on an already filthy rag. "They did. Thank you. They were very efficient." An awkward silence fell between them. He was a client, a benefactor. The transaction was complete. There was no reason for him to be here. Maya saved him. She hopped off her chair and walked over, holding up her drawing. "It's for you," she said, "because you helped Mommy." Julian stared at the drawing. The horse was a vibrant, chaotic explosion of purple and orange, its wings uneven but drawn with undeniable joy. He hadn't been given a gift that wasn't a corporate obligations in 15 years. He accepted the piece of paper as if it were a fragile artifact. "Thank you, Maya. It's very dynamic." Maya giggled. "That's a big word." Sarah watched them, a small, tired smile on her face. "She's right, you know. I haven't thanked you properly." She gestured to a pair of mismatched stools. "Can I get you a coffee? It's just instant, nothing fancy." "I'd like that," Julian said, surprised at his own sincerity. As she prepared the coffee in a tiny, cluttered kitchenette at the back of the garage, she began to talk. It wasn't a confession, just a simple statement of fact, the story of a life lived on the defensive. Rick was her ex-husband, They'd started the garage together, but his drinking and his temper had escalated until she'd had no choice but to leave and get the restraining order. But he felt entitled to the business she had painstakingly built from nothing after he was gone. "He shows up every few months," she said, her back to him as she stirred the coffee. "Makes a scene, tries to tell me this place is half his. The vultures are good guys. They scare him off when they're around, but they can't be here all the time." Julian listened, not as a developer assessing a liability, but as a man hearing a story of resilience. He saw the worn-out tools, the patched-together equipment, the sheer force of will it must have taken for her to keep this place afloat. It was a different kind of empire than his, built not of steel and glass, but of grit and grease. He felt a pang of something that felt dangerously like admiration. This woman wasn't a problem to be solved. She was a fortress. That first coffee became a ritual. Julian found excuses to visit the garage, a supposed rattle in his engine that Sarah, with one listen, would diagnose as his imagination. A question about a classic car he was thinking of acquiring. Each visit chipped away a small piece of the ice that had encased his heart for years. He learned that Maya loved strawberry ice cream and was afraid of spiders. He learned that Sarah could rebuild a transmission with her eyes closed, but struggled with the garage's bookkeeping. He started helping with the books, transforming her shoebox of crumpled receipts into an orderly spreadsheet. It was a task that utilized his skills, making him feel useful in a way his multi-million-dollar deals never did. In return, Sarah taught him the difference between a socket wrench and a torque wrench. They would work in comfortable silence, the air filled with the smell of oil and coffee, Maya providing a running commentary from her coloring table. One afternoon, he noticed a small wooden music box on a shelf, its lid slightly ajar, its ballerina figurine tilted at a sad angle. "It was my grandmother's," Sarah explained, seeing his gaze. "The mechanism is broken. I've tried to fix it, but the gears are so tiny. It's beyond me." Julian, a man who oversaw teams of engineers and architects, picked it up. He felt the intricate, delicate craftsmanship. For all his power and wealth, he had no idea how to fix something so small and precious. The box felt like a metaphor for his own life. Ornate on the outside, broken within. "Let me take a look," he offered. He took it back to his penthouse, a piece of Sarah and Maya's warm, cluttered world invading his minimalist sanctuary. For hours he sat at his vast glass desk, ignoring calls from his brokers, and tinkered with the tiny gears. He failed. He couldn't make the music play. The visits to the garage became the focal point of his week. He took them for pizza. He went to the park with them and let Maya teach him how to properly use a swing. He felt a lightness he hadn't experienced in years. He laughed, a real unforced sound that surprised even him. The cold, calculating world of Vance Holdings seemed a distant reality. He was beginning to feel like a man again, not just a machine built for acquisition. One evening, sitting on the stools in the quiet garage after Maya had fallen asleep in the small apartment upstairs, Sarah looked at him, her expression serious. "You never talk about yourself, Julian. You know all my sob stories. What's yours? Why is a man like you always so alone?" The question was direct, devoid of pity. It was an invitation to be seen, and to his own astonishment he accepted. He told her about Marcus Thorne, the man who had been like a brother to him. They had built their first company from the ground up. Julian was the visionary, Marcus the charismatic salesman. And then, one day Marcus was gone, along with $10 million and the company's proprietary designs. He had left Julian with crushing debt and a betrayal so profound it had cauterized his ability to trust. "I rebuilt," Julian said, his voice low. "I made it all back and more. I promised myself I would never be that vulnerable, that stupid ever again. I built walls of glass and steel around me, literally and figuratively." Sarah reached out and placed her calloused hand over his. Her touch was warm, grounding. "Walls don't keep the bad people out," she said softly. "They just keep the good people from getting in." The moment of connection was shattered by the shrill ring of his phone. He glanced at the screen. The name displayed made the blood freeze in his veins. "Marcus Thorne," he answered, his voice turning to ice. "What do you want, Marcus?" "Julian, my old friend?" Marcus's voice was as slick and insincere as ever. "I hear you're making a play for the waterfront. Funny, so am I. Just thought you should know the game is on again. And this time, I know all your weaknesses." the line went dead. A cold dread washed over Julian. Marcus was back, and the waterfront revitalization project, his crowning achievement, was suddenly a battlefield. The first salvo came a week later, an official notice plastered on the door of Sarah's auto and every other small business on the block. It's son was an eviction notice from a shell corporation, citing a little-known zoning ordinance. The legal language was dense and impenetrable, but the message was clear: get out. Sarah confronted him, the notice trembling in her hand. This is your project, isn't it? The waterfront revitalization. You were going to do this all along. You were just, what? Sizing me up? Was I just a loose end for you to tie up? The hurt in her eyes was a physical blow, worse than any financial loss. No, Sarah, I swear, he pleaded, the words feeling inadequate. This isn't me. It's him. It's Marcus. But the trust, so painstakingly built over weeks of shared coffee and quiet conversations, was fractured. She retreated behind her own walls, her voice becoming cold and distant. I need you to leave, Julian. He walked away from the garage, feeling the familiar, hollow ache of isolation he thought he had escaped. He had let someone in, and the world had immediately punished him for it. He went directly to Marcus's new, opulent office, a gaudy monument to stolen success. Marcus sat behind a desk the size of a small car, a smug smile on his face. Impressive, isn't it? Marcus began. What you can build when you're not burdened by things like loyalty. Leave her out of this, Marcus, Julian snarled. This is between us. Marcus laughed. Everything is part of this, Julian. I learned that from you. The city council wants a clean, unanimous acquisition. That little block of greasy spoons and garages is the only thing holding up the final vote. Your pet project, the mechanic, she's your weakness. You've gone soft. So here's the deal. You cede the project to me, walk away, and I'll let her keep her little shop. Or you fight me, and I will personally bulldoze that garage with you watching, and I'll make sure the whole city knows that the great Julian Vance crushed a poor, single mother for his vanity project. Your choice. The ultimatum hung in the air, a poison dart aimed at the very heart of his newfound happiness. Marcus had laid a perfect trap. To win the project, he would have to become the monster everyone thought he was, destroying the one person who had made him feel human again. To save her, he would have to surrender his life's work, the symbol of his comeback, to the man he hated most in the world. Julian returned to his penthouse. The city lights, once a symbol of his power, now seemed to mock him. He stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows, the reflection showing a man trapped in a gilded cage. For 10 years, his entire existence had been a reaction to Marcus's betrayal. He had built his new empire on a foundation of vengeance and distrust. Winning the waterfront project was supposed to be the final checkmate, the ultimate proof that he had triumphed. But when he closed his eyes, he didn't see the blueprints for the gleaming towers he planned to build. He saw Maya's crayon drawing of a flying horse, taped neatly to the side of his billion-dollar super fridge. He heard Sarah's quiet laughter in the noisy garage. He felt the phantom weight of her hand on his. He looked at the broken music box still sitting on his desk. He had failed to fix it because he was trying to force the pieces together, to bend them to his will. He realized Sarah's approach was different. She didn't force things. She understood them. She listened. She found the harmony. In that moment, the choice became devastatingly clear. Winning, as he had defined it for a decade, meant losing everything that now mattered. The walls of his fortress had to come down, not for Sarah to get in, but for him to get out. He picked up his phone and made a call, not to his lawyers, but to a city councilwoman he knew to be a woman of integrity. The final city council meeting was packed. Journalists, investors, and community members filled every seat. Marcus was in the front row, exuding confidence. Julian saw Sarah and Maya slip in quietly at the back, standing near the wall. Next to them, impossibly, stood Grizz and a half-dozen members of the Road Vultures, their leather vests a stark contrast to the room's formal decor. They were there for Sarah, a silent, intimidating show of support. Julian was called to the podium to give his final presentation. He walked to the front, the weight of every eye in the room on him. He looked at his prepared speech on the teleprompter, a dry recitation of profit margins and economic impact. Then he looked at Sarah. Her face was a mask of anxiety and hope. He turned off the teleprompter. Good evening, he began, his voice steady and clear. For the past 2 years, my company has worked to create a vision for the waterfront. A vision of progress, of growth, of prosperity. He paused, letting the words hang in the air. But a vision of prosperity that comes at the cost of a community's soul is not progress. It is destruction. A murmur went through the crowd. Marcus's smile faltered. My competitor, Mr. Thorne, Julian continued, his gaze locking with Marcus's, has presented a plan that relies on the swift, aggressive, and frankly predatory acquisition of the last parcel of land needed for this development. He has used shell corporations and legal intimidation to threaten the livelihoods of good people, people who have built their lives and businesses there, people like Sarah Jenkins, owner of Sarah's Auto. He pulled a file from his jacket. I am officially withdrawing my company's bid for the waterfront revitalization project. Gasps echoed through the chamber. Furthermore, I am submitting this evidence of Mr. Thorne's unethical and illegal business practices to this council and to the press. This project should not be awarded to a man who would threaten a single mother to get what he wants. He laid the file on the podium. It was a complete record of Marcus's shell corporations and the harassing letters they had sent. He had sacrificed his empire, his revenge, his entire professional identity in a single 5-minute speech. He had chosen integrity. He had chosen love. The room erupted. Flashbulbs popped as journalists scrambled. The council members were in a shocked uproar. Marcus sat stunned, his face pale, his empire crumbling around him in real time. Julian didn't wait to see the fallout. He walked away from the podium, away from the life he had built, and straight toward the back of the room. He walked toward Sarah. Her face was wet with tears, but she was smiling, a radiant, beautiful smile that lit up her entire being. He stopped in front of her, the noise of the chaotic room fading to a dull roar. You threw it all away, she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. No, Julian said, reaching out and gently wiping a tear from her cheek. I found something worth keeping. Grizz stepped forward and clapped a hand the size of a dinner plate on Julian's shoulder. Took you long enough, suit, the biker rumbled, a ghost of a smile in his eyes. It was the highest form of praise he could offer. 6 months later, the sun streamed down on a rooftop garden bursting with life. Where there had once been only sterile gravel and a lonely view, there were now rows of tomatoes, fragrant herbs, and vibrant flowers. Julian, his sleeves rolled up and his hands covered in soil, knelt beside Sarah as she showed him how to properly plant a basil seedling. The scandal had destroyed Marcus Thorne. Vance Holdings had taken a massive hit, but Julian, free from the obsessive need for revenge, had restructured. It was a smaller, more focused company now, one that invested in communities instead of just displacing them. His first project was a fund to provide low-interest loans to the very businesses on that cul-de-sac, securing their future. Maya ran through the garden, chasing a monarch butterfly, her laughter echoing in the warm afternoon air. The vintage music box sat on a small patio table, fully restored. Together, they had patiently pieced it back together, and now it played its sweet, delicate melody. Julian looked at Sarah, her face glowing in the sunlight, and then at Maya, a whirlwind of joyful energy. He had spent a decade building an empire of glass and steel, a monument to his own isolation. He had thought that was strength, but he was wrong. True wealth wasn't measured in square footage or stock prices. It was built, slowly and carefully, from the simple, sturdy foundations of a shared life.